Domestic violence restraining orders, emergency protective orders, and criminal protective orders. What are they? How do they work? And what can you do if there's one in place? We're going to be talking about that in this video. It's very important because we see a lot of guys get caught up with these situations. There's a lot of misconceptions and misinformation out there, so we want to make sure we clear the air on this. So let's start with the DVRO, the Domestic Violence Restraining Order. Any person who feels like they've been subjected to abuse, whether that's physical abuse or emotional abuse, can request a domestic violence restraining order. They're going to file their paperwork with the court, and within 24 hours, they'll be issued a temporary restraining order. They're then going to take that paperwork, and there's going to be a court date where there's going to be a hearing as to whether a permanent restraining order should be issued. Now, they have to serve that paperwork on you so that you have an opportunity to respond. So just because they request it doesn't mean that a permanent restraining order is going to be issued. What happens is they send you that paperwork, or you get served with it, and then you have an opportunity to file a response, and then there's a hearing. In terms of who can request a domestic violence restraining order, this is going to be someone where there's an intimate relationship. So boyfriend, girlfriend, girlfriend, boyfriend, 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 girlfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, wife, you get the deal, right? So it's going to be an intimate relationship, marriage. It can also be parent-child. So, a child can request a restraining order, domestic violence restraining order against their parents, and vice versa, and also between siblings. So if that order is in place, if that order ultimately is granted, then there's going to be certain restrictions on that person. So that's in general what the domestic violence restraining order is. Next, we have the emergency protective order. If the police respond to an alleged domestic violence incident, the alleged victim can be issued an emergency protective order. This protective order is usually good for a few days, up to a week or so, usually before the case goes in front of the judge, at which point the judge can issue what's going to be next, which would be a criminal protective order. So the criminal protective order is at arraignment. And if you, are interested at what happens at arraignment, we have another video. I'll link that here on what happens at the first hearing in a criminal case. The judge is going to accept the defendant's not guilty plea, and then they're going to address release conditions, including any protective orders. So when you have whether it's a domestic violence crime or any sort of violent crime, the prosecutor can request a criminal protective order. And so in that situation, if the facts of the case suggest that a protective order is necessary in order to protect witnesses and or the alleged victim, then the judge can order that a criminal protective order be put in place. So if there's one of these orders in place, whether it's a domestic violence restraining order, an emergency protective order, or a criminal protective order, they're going to say that you cannot harass, attack, strike, molest, annoy. They're going to say you cannot contact this person. So you can't call them, you can't text them, email them. You can't be within a certain distance. Usually it's going to be about 50 to 100 yards of that person. Basically, you have to completely leave this person alone, because whether, it's the police officer that, based on their investigation, determined that an emergency protective order was necessary, or a judge in the case of the CPO or the DVRO, they've determined that, hey, the protected party is at risk if you're allowed to have contact with them, so you're not allowed to have any contact with them. What does that mean in terms of the distance? If you're at a restaurant and you see them there, you need to leave, right? You might be like, hey, that's where they serve my favorite burgers, right? And she knows that, and she happens to pop up at the spot. No, it doesn't matter. You need to leave. If you don't, then that could be considered a misdemeanor violation, and that'd be a stupid reason for you to end up with new criminal charges just because you guys ended up at the same place at the same time. And, it can get really tricky when it comes to these protective orders especially when we're talking about a relationship, right? Because either you may still be in a relationship or you just recently were in a relationship, right? So if there is some sort of domestic violence incident, that can be sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, and maybe that terminates the relationship. But we all know, was it makeups to breakups, breakups to makeups? And when you're in that situation, it's very easy to want to patch things back up. Both of you miss each other. There's a strong temptation to want to get back together. And, if there's a protective order in place, you're really making a big mistake by, violating that protective order. Or sometimes people don't even realize they're violating the protective order. But if you've been ordered by a judge or you've been issued an emergency protective order and they say that you can't be near this person, then that is exactly, it means what it means what it says, that you cannot be in contact with this person. And so, hey, we're in the real world, and sometimes those days go by and your girl had a bottle of wine and she wants you to come through, right? It's been a few days. You're like, hey, let's go. But, you have to think smart, right? Because she can contact you, right? Whether it's an emergency protective order, a DVRO, or a CPO, she is allowed to contact you. There's actually nothing prohibiting her from contacting you. But if you text back, right? If you text back, that's a violation. If you go to the house, that's a violation. If you call her, that's a violation. You're with her, that's a violation. And, the temptation becomes all the more strong because you're like, all right, well, how's anybody going to find out, right? But what happens, the next morning, you guys end up spending the night together. You're wanting to lay up longer, and she's like, no, I want you out of here, right? She's sobered up. She's like, get out. I remember you slapped the hell out of me. I want you gone. And then, there's an argument. All she has to do is pick up the phone, call the police, and now you're getting arrested because you're in violation of the protective order. And I wouldn't be saying this if I hadn't seen it happen over and over and over again. It happens more often than you would think. So you just really have to abide by these protective orders and take them seriously. I mean, you can be charged with a misdemeanor for each individual contact. I've seen cases where people get charged with 20 different counts of protective order violations. It might be 5 emails, 10 text messages, 4 phone calls, and showing up at the house, right? Each one of these are misdemeanor violations, and you can be put into custody for this, so it has to be taken seriously. So what about the situation where the protected party does not want the protective order in place? This is a very common situation too, right? There may have been an event where, there was a violent situation, and maybe on paper, it seems appropriate that there should be some sort of protective order in place, but the protected party doesn't want it, right? So at that arraignment, when the judge is addressing this situation, in domestic violence cases, the DA is going to make a request for that protective order. And as we've discussed in other videos, unfortunately, for purposes of bail and release conditions, the judge has to accept as true the position from the DA. So the DA is going to simply be reading from the police report, and whatever's in that police report, the DA is going to say, and the judge is going to take that essentially as the gospel truth, right? But there are instances in which, maybe the facts of the case are pretty ugly, but the girlfriend or the wife doesn't want the order in place. And so they can make that known to the court by showing up and having their voice heard, saying, hey, I understand, whatever happened, but I don't fear for my safety around this person. I don't feel like I need protection. I want them to be able to contact me. I want to be able to be in the same room as this person. And sometimes, and this can be insanely frustrating for all parties involved, sometimes depending on the seriousness of the charge and the details of the allegations, sometimes the judge will say, hey, I hear you, ma'am, but, I'm issuing a protective order anyway. And what can happen in that situation is, you just have to let the situation breathe, and you have to abide by the court's order. Again, if you if you violate that order, you are only doing yourself a disservice, because you're harming your chances of having that protective order modified. And again, you're subjecting yourself to potential further criminal liability on top of the charges that you're facing in the first place, right? But if you're doing your thing right, after the passage of time, your defense attorney can actually put a hearing on calendar to address the protective order, right? So you can request that that order be modified to what's called a no negative contact order or a peaceful contact order. And what this would mean is that there is still a protective order in place, but now you can actually be near your loved one as long as there's no violence or no harassment. In some instances, the protective order can be lifted altogether. And this is huge because being forced to be separated from your loved one can obviously be extremely difficult emotionally, but practically it can be a challenge as well, because you guys share an apartment together, or you share a house together. If there's one of these protective orders in place, you have to leave, right? So you have to leave that residence, and you might be paying rent at that place, or you might be paying on the mortgage, and now you have to find another place to live, right? Living in a motel sucks, right? Or there's only so much time your brother's going to allow you to sleep on his couch and eat his Cheerios, right? So it can be really difficult a situation for a couple to be separated in this way. So obviously you would want to do everything that you can to get back in your home as soon as possible. So the next question would be, well, how can I put myself in the best position to have that order modified or lifted altogether? The way you do this is by demonstrating to the DA and to the judge that you're not a danger to this individual, right? If there was alcohol involved in the situation or drugs involved in the situation, you're going to want to enroll in Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, self-help meetings. The more the better, right? If you can get in there a couple times a week, then that's going to show that you're seriously committed to addressing your alcohol issues or your drug issues. If you have anger management issues, right? We all know that when a person, engages in domestic violence, a lot of times there are some underlying anger issues. If you can take steps to address your anger issues by getting in an anger management class, then you might learn something that would be good for your life in general, not just that case. But that's going to be a positive step in the right direction. You might start with therapy sessions. That could be a good thing, where you're actually addressing the underlying issues that led to you being in this situation in the first place. At the end of the day, what you have to take into consideration is that no DA, no judge, the police, they don't want blood on their hands. They don't want to see what has already been a violent situation escalate to something more serious, right? We've all heard of situations, whether in our own personal lives or, seeing TV or movies, where something started off with, perhaps little minor aggressions, escalated up to, punches, kicks, slaps, things like that. And then, due to no intervention, or even sometimes with intervention, the guy ends up killing the woman, or the woman ends up killing the guy. No judge, no DA wants to see that happen. So they are acting in what they consider to be the best interest of the alleged victim, a witness, or society in general, by putting these protective orders in place. So in order for them to back off of that, you really have to show them, to their satisfaction, that you're not going to be a danger to this person. There's not going to be any risk of their safety, being harmed or molested by the order being lifted. I hope this was helpful. I just want to say one more time, if you have one of these orders in place, please follow the rules. You don't want to end up with a new criminal charge for violating a protective order. If you got something out of this, please show me some love, hit that like button, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and turn on those notifications so you never miss a new video when it drops. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace.